Good evening, everyone. My name is Caesar Rondina. It's June 10th, 2019, Monday evening at 8:30, and welcome to my video blog post for this month. This particular blog post comes as a secondary request, if you want to call that. I touched on the topic of communications a while back in one of my written blog posts, and a reader sent me an email saying, or asking me if I could elaborate a little bit more on it, because the topic I used it for at the time was a little bit different than what we're going to talk about tonight. So when we talk about communicating, myth or a fact, do we need to communicate? Is that true? Is that not true? Or do people just assume that we know what they're talking about? So let's talk about that a little bit. But I want you to keep one thing in mind as we go through this, and I'm just reading some notes that I wrote, is throughout this whole topic, remember this important point. People want answers. That's why they ask questions. Some of the biggest mistakes we all make as people, and I know I make it as well, is we just assume someone knows what we meant. We assume that we explained it properly in a way that they're going to understand it, because let's face it, we know what we mean, so why should we figure other people don't know what we mean when we talk? Which brings us to a very common phrase that we've all heard throughout time. It's not what we say, it's how we say it. What that basically means is it's not so much important what you're telling someone. What's really important is how you're telling it to them. You could be very condescending when you talk to someone. You could raise your voice. Listen, there's many, many times when my girl and I are talking on the phone, and I'm Italian, so I get excited very easy, and my voice starts to raise, and she'll say, "Wait, honey, calm down a little bit. You don't need to be yelling." And I'm really not yelling. I'm just expressing myself. So a lot of times people misunderstand the way you come across, because it might be your nature, by your culture, by your past, the way you used to have to speak to people in the past. Because let's not kid ourselves, we've all come across people in our lives where if you don't drum it into their head with a sledgehammer, they just simply don't get it. So you think you have to talk to everybody that way. And, this affects every aspect of your life communications. It affects your personal relationships, how you communicate with your children, and where you really spend the most amount of your time is at work. And remember what I said, people ask questions because they want to know the answers. Okay, people are curious. They need to know these things. So we can't expect people to know things. We can't expect people to read our minds. In the workplace, and my best-selling book was on management and employee relations. And many times in my working career, I worked for individuals that just never explained anything. It was just simply do this. Don't worry about why you're doing it. Don't ask any questions why you're doing it. Just do it. Just do it. Well, that's really poor management skills, because, again, as a species, we are curious. We want to know what we're doing and why. If we understand the why, then we could easily achieve goals. And I've always said, don't ever hold me responsible for anything that you don't explain to me, because if you don't explain it to me, don't expect me to know it. And I get very adamant about that, and you could probably tell that by the tone in which I just said what I said. So, it's a really large problem in the workplace, because bosses just don't interact well in today's employment environment with their employees. They just have the attitude, listen, I'm paying you, just do what I tell you to do. You don't have to know why you're doing it. Well, that's not true for people. That only doesn't take into account your workplace, it takes into account your personal life. Let's talk about when you're chatting with your children. And we all do this. I was a parent. I raised 3 children. I raised 2 boys and a girl. And let me tell you, and make no mistake about this, my daughter was a handful, twice what my boys were. And most girls are, especially in their teenage years. But what I found with my children is, if I make them understand why I'm guiding them in one particular direction, then even though they still may blow it off, because I was a kid, when my parents tried to explain things to me, I blew it off too, and you probably did as well. But you know what? At some point in time, it kicks in, and something will happen, they'll experience something, and the first thought that'll come to their mind is, my father told me that, my parents told me that, my mother told me that. And that's how things start to kick in. But do we do that in everyday life when we talk to one another, like I'm talking to you now? So in my topic tonight, I'm explaining to you basically why I'm talking about it and the effects that it has. So here you are, you're dealing with your wife, you're dealing with your girlfriend, significant other, your partner, whatever terminology you want to use, and you just expect that they're going to know things. Well, that's not true. That's not true at all. People, as a rule, do not judge or evaluate, is really the proper word, other people by as much what they say as much as what they do. For example, you know, you're a husband, you could tell your wife, I love you 1,000 times a week. And you know what? After 2 or 3 weeks, the I love you doesn't mean as much anymore. If you don't back it up with what you do in the fact that you show her that you love her. So it's very important that our actions and our deeds back up the words that we say, because that in a sense is a form of explanation without having to draw it out and put it into words. You know, and again, I'm just going to use myself as an example. There's many times my girl and I are talking on the phone and she'll say, I know what you mean. You don't have to explain it, because I have a tendency to try and explain everything. And that comes from being a public speaker, because when you're speaking to hundreds of people, you have to make sure they get the message. So you tend to go into a little more detail when you're talking about something. So some of that bleeds into my personal life. And it's something that I've had to work on for years. To be heard, because inherently as people, it's in our nature to want to be right. People don't want to be wrong, they want to be right. So they want that last word in to make sure that everybody knows they're right. Well, you know what? That's a get you nowhere quick situation. You're never going to win, you're always going to lose. So you have to learn how to communicate with each other. And let me just give you an example. You know, and I'm not saying you sit down and do this with a stopwatch, um, you know, but let's say you give each other, or both people are having a discussion, give each other a reasonable amount of time without interrupting each other to make their point. Now, there are times during that conversation you may want to interrupt that person. And it's okay to say, hey, listen, excuse me just 1 second. I just want to put this thought in so I don't forget it. Do it that way rather than just blatantly interrupt what they're trying to say, which is disrespectful, is very rude, puts them on the defensive, and gets them mad. So it's also the manner in which you communicate. You know, when we talk about work, which I mentioned earlier, and I have a tutorial on udemy.com that's all about management and employee relations. And what I discuss heavily is the difference between a leader and a boss. And the leader is the person that's going to lead by example. And the boss is the person that's just going to stand there and tell you what to do. Many, many years ago, I owned my own two-way electronics business for 17 years. And I was able to ask, and I use the word ask versus tell, because I never told anybody that worked for me what to do. I always asked them to do it. And you know what? I never had a problem. No one ever said to me, no, I'm not doing that, because I never asked them to do anything that they didn't see me do myself. If we were busy and I had to get out there and I had to work alongside with the installers, I did it. You know, when I ran a warehouse and I was a warehouse manager, If the line was backing up, I got off my butt, went outside, and helped the guy in the line get the boxes moving. Okay? So when you do that, when you lead by example, then people can't say no to you. It's very hard for them to do that. And communicating is the same way. If you communicate with someone in the manner in which you want them to communicate to you, and let's not kid ourselves, we all know how we want to and not want to be spoken to. So if you keep that in the back of your mind and don't do that to the other person, you're going to find that your communication goes much smoother, much better, and there's going to be far less misunderstandings. So again, oftentimes we're not direct, we're not to the point. So in my topic today about communicating, if you notice, every point that I'm speaking to or speaking about, it's very direct and it's to the point, because I want to make sure that you understand what I'm saying. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm not going to try and get to it through the back door. I'm going to hit you between the eyes with it and tell you about it, because that's what communicating is all about. Now, why do relationships fail? Let's make it a little bit more personal for a moment. And in my book, Making Partnership Choices, I discuss this in great length. Most relationships fail for lack of communicating. Think about this. And I have to laugh about it because we've all experienced it. And if you haven't, I would be greatly surprised. When you first start a relationship, you're on the phone for 2 hours, 3 hours. It's like you can't get enough of each other. And that goes on for a couple of 3 weeks. And then as you start to spend time together, all of a sudden you're not spending 2 hours on the phone, every single day anymore. You might be spending 10, 15 minutes a day total on the phone. You might just be touching base with some text messages throughout the course of the day, having a quick conversation, and then it's over. And, why does that happen? Well, let's look at the psyche behind it. When you first meet somebody, you don't know them. There's so much to learn about them that you have a lot to talk about. And that happens over a 2 or 3 hour period of time, almost every single day on the phone. It's like that first time you taste the food that you really love. You can't get enough of it, so you eat it all the time until you're sick of it. Well, relationships are the same way, and communications are the same way. So don't think because you're not talking as much on the phone or communicating as much that you have a problem in your relationship. What's more important to focus on is the quality of communication that you have. And when you do communicate, what you talk about. Because you have to have things to talk about when you're together. If you do it all on a telephone call, or if you do it all in text messaging, you're going to get together at night and you're going to be two bumps on the log sitting on the couch watching TV with nothing to say, or going out to dinner and just staring at each other while you eat. So, it's a matter of pacing yourself. When you need to talk about something important, you do it. But do it directly. Make sure the other person understands. And that's the big key to communicating. So when we talk about communications, myth or fact, there is no myth. The fact is, communications is important. It's actually very vital to the success of your life, because everything you do in your life, if you think about it, revolves around communicating. Whether it's communicating with a store manager you're having a problem with, or a cashier that you're having an issue with a price on something, whether it's your life partner, whether it's your friends. It's all about communicating and how you do it. So do a little self-evaluation, okay? And think about how you communicate, and think about if you're communicating the right way. And you know what? The other thing is, don't be a wimp, okay? If you're with your friends or your life partner or whatever, or even your boss at work, if you don't understand something, ask that person to explain it. Don't think by asking someone to explain something, they're going to think you're stupid. Come on. I do a lot of speaking engagements, and a lot of times there's small groups, book clubs. I do a lot of volunteer work at schools where I work with younger kids that are into writing. And nobody ever asks questions, because people aren't going to ask questions until they feel comfortable. So it's my job to make people comfortable so they feel comfortable asking a question. So one way to do that is for you to start that ball rolling. If you have a question about what someone said to you, by all means, step up and say, hey, listen, do me a favor. Maybe I misunderstood what you said, but this is the way I took it. So can you clarify it for me? And I'm going to tell you, 99.9% of the times that person is going to say, oh, I didn't mean it that way. And they're going to explain it, you know. So many things are misunderstood because also it's a busy life and we talk really, really fast. And we want to get in, we want to get out, we want to get it over with, we want to move on to the next thing. Again, you have to make sure you're clear. That's extremely important because life is busy. We don't spend as much time with our significant others as we would like to. Even if you're married and you're living in the same household, if you're raising kids, you're so busy, one's going one way, one's going the other way. By the time you get in bed at night, the last thing you want to do is sit there and have a lengthy conversation. So it's really important that when you do communicate well. So then the myth and the fact is there is no myth to communicating. The fact is you have to do it. You have to do it well. You have to do it properly. And you have to do it effectively. And that summarizes pretty much my topic about communicating myth or fact tonight. A couple of last notes before I leave. And on the bottom of the screen is my email address. So please feel free at any time, drop me an email, ask me a question. I answer all questions myself. Nobody on my staff does that. And I say that all the time. The other thing is a couple of upcoming things. This week here, the third book in my murder mystery trilogy, Life Through a Mirror, One Murder Call, should be available for sale. It's already available on audiobook, but the print and the ebook version will be available this week. And I've been getting a lot of requests because the reviews on my love story, When Two Worlds Collide, which isn't due to be released till September, have been fantastic. And I've also gotten some requests. So that might get released a little bit early. So you might want to watch for that. All my books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Almost any online major book outlet has them. You could also get them from my publisher's website. That's Author House Bookstore. So, you know, all these links are on my website. And my website address is also at the bottom of the screen. So please feel free to visit my website, browse around. We've also been very busy because our video production company is doing quite well. And it's growing a little bit each day. We're getting more work, and that's a lot of fun. And I also put that on the bottom of the screen in case you want to check out that website and see what kind of things we do there. And also my Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter contact are also on the screen. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your time tonight. Spring is over. We're hitting summer pretty soon. I want you to be safe no matter what you do. Have a good time. Do it safely. And God bless, and thank you so much for joining me tonight.